In this section, we are going to talk about the image tag in some detail. The image tag is used to embed and display images in a web page. Recall that it's a void tag. Why is that? Because it does not contain anything after the opening tag and before the closing tag. For this reason, it's perfectly okay to combine the opening and the closing tags by tacking on a forward slash at the end of the tag. We have encountered the image tag a bunch of times already, and so again we can recall that it has a source attribute. This specifies where the image file is located. This is a URL, and this URL could be either a relative or an absolute path. We have already discussed paths and how relative and absolute paths differ from each other and when it makes sense to use one over the other. Recall that relative paths make sense when you're referring to a file or a resource in your own website. Absolute paths, by contrast, make sense when you're referring to an external resource which you would not be able to refer to via a relative path. In this example, let's begin by deconstructing what the browser has to do when it encounters an image tag. In other words, how does the browser know how to display an image? Consider a really simple piece of HTML which we use to display a bunch of course images. These are the images for our courses on Udemy. I hope you won't mind a little bit of our self-promotion here. As usual, the HTML is on the left and the browser's rendition of that HTML is on the right. We have 4 image tags on the left and we have 4 images appearing one after another on the right. The process of loading an image tag or displaying an image to screen consists of 2 distinct steps. Step 1 is loading the HTML. This is the browser loading the HTML and understanding that an image has to be displayed. Step 2 involves loading the actual image. This image is at a URL somewhere else on the web, and therefore it involves yet another server call. This is an important point to note. Every image load involves a separate request sent to the server for that particular image resource. This means that loading an image tag is a lot more computationally heavy duty for the browser than loading other HTML tags. It takes a long time to load an image because it involves again making yet another trip to the server. How long the image load takes depends on the size of the image. The larger the image, the longer it takes to load. All of this is common sense. We've presumably encountered this in our day-to-day browsing habits. Even so, it's worth explicitly keeping this in mind while designing our web pages. Handling image tags, again, is much more computationally demanding and takes much longer than handling other HTML tags. And that's because every image load involves one additional trip to the server. Let's cast our mind's eye back to our very first HTML page. If you recall, it was a page with a bright red background and it had 2 images. It had the skeleton up top and it had the little girl doing a karate kick down below. Let's for a second zoom in on those 2 images. Notice that the image of the skeleton is transparent. The image of the little girl, on the other hand, is opaque and it has a white background. This has a lesson for us. Images can have their properties modified. For instance, you can edit an image in an image editing tool such as Adobe Photoshop or Inkscape and make it transparent. This depends also on the type of the image. So, what type of image file do we use? This is an excellent question, so let's take a minute to ponder. The most common image formats, and there are many of them, are JPEG, PNG, and GIF or GIF. There is a reason why each of these is so popular. The image tag does not discriminate. It works with all of these types of images. Let's take a quick survey of the 3 common image types and see what their strengths and weaknesses are. The JPEG image format is particularly useful for photos. That's typically where it's used. JPEG is a lossy format because it involves compression. On the one hand, this makes the file sizes smaller so the pages load faster, which is good. On the other hand, the quality of the image can tend to deteriorate a little bit because of the compression. Also, JPEGs do not support transparency. The next common type of image format is PNG, which stands for Portable Network Graphics. This is an excellent format for logos or images with relatively few solid strokes. This is a lossless format. This has a pro and a con. On the one hand, because this format is lossless, file sizes are larger than JPEG files, which causes the page to load slowly. On the other hand, because there isn't any compression or lossiness involved, the quality of the image tends to be better. The PNG format also allows the best support for transparency. You can specify all or any number of colors to be set to transparent. The third common type of image is GIF. The GIF image format is excellent again for logos or images with few solid strokes. It also allows animation via animated GIFs. The GIF format is also lossless, so the file sizes tend to be larger than JPEG file sizes, but also potentially higher quality and involving animation. GIFs can represent images up to 256 colors. GIFs only allow one color to be set to transparent, so their support for transparency is less than that of PNG files. Let's now turn our attention from the different types of image formats to the different attributes of the image tag. There are a bunch of potentially useful attributes that we should be sure to understand. Let's first talk about the width and height attributes of the image tag. Let's say we do not specify a height or a width for our image tag. By default, the image is going to be displayed with the size or the resolution that the server served it up with. In this example that you can see on screen now, we have an enormous image. It's 2048 by 1152 pixels. This image will not fit on the page at all. You'll have to scroll in order to see it. A much better way of displaying this image is to specify a height and a width attribute. These attributes help make the image fit to the proportions that we want. This makes for a far more aesthetically pleasing viewing experience, but these attributes can squish the images if the proportions do not match the original proportions in their aspect ratio. Again, the image on the web page will fit this height and width no matter what the aspect ratio. One note about these attributes: it's the original large image that will be sent from the server to the browser. The resizing will only be performed on the browser, i.e. on the client. In other words, there is no performance benefit to be gained from specifying a smaller width or height for your image. If you are concerned about how long it takes for your images to load and the file sizes are getting too large, simply serve up a smaller image from the server. That works. It will not work for you to change the height and the width using these attributes. This will change how the image looks. It will not change how long it takes for the image to load. Next, let's talk about what happens if our image link is broken. That's pretty annoying. It makes for a poor browsing experience because what gets shown up is this weird image placeholder that you see on screen now. This again is poor form. Your webpage should never display this. This is very annoying, especially if the user has no idea what that image was even supposed to represent. Now, you may not always be able to control images. For instance, you may end up linking to an external image which might be moved, and so you have little option but to deal with a broken link gracefully. And that's exactly what you are able to do using the alt attribute of the image tag. Alt stands for alternative, and it's a textual description of the image. This textual description will be displayed by the browser in case the image load failed. This really improves the browsing experience in the case of a broken image link. Here's an example of how this attribute works. You can see on screen now, first is the image that we would like to display. If the image loads fine, then the alt attribute does nothing. The text doesn't appear anywhere. On the other hand, if the image load fails, then the alt text is displayed in that box. This at least tells the user what the image was all about. And there's one last little bit that we should note about the image tag. Remember how we mentioned that we had 4 image tags, one below the other, and we had 4 images, one next to the other. In other words, the images showed up in a row one after the other. That's because the image tag is an inline tag. It does not add a line break. If the image is too large to fit onto a particular line, it will simply be moved to the next line.